Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on this webinar. We're just going to wait for a couple of minutes just to let some people continue to trickle in. So we'll start in about a minute or two.
Thank you, Rob.
We all got our coffee. We need to be caffeinated up for this one.
We do. I actually have an energy drink here, my American self. Rob, is it a tea or a coffee? Water?
It's a 3 p.m. coffee, but I didn't look down on the energy drinks. What brand is it? I know you guys have like a dozen brands out there.
Have you seen this?
Is it Celsius?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Is it the clean one? It's like really not that bad for you. Is that right?
Yeah, this is like 0 grams of sugar.
it's at least it's not like showing up with Liquid Death, which is the one that cracks me up so much. So, Rob, have you seen Liquid Death? Are you aware of what
That's not
this
a
is?
brand. That's not a
It's an
brand.
actual brand. You should
Oh
totally
no,
look
you
it
got
up.
to see this stuff, Rob.
And it is water. It is just water
water.
in a can.
That's so
And
funny.
the concept of it is
They're
they want to make.
expensive.
Yeah, it's very expensive. It is very expensive. The concept is they want to make drinking water cool, so that if you're out at a bar or something like that, you don't feel bad about drinking it. So you can order a Liquid Death, and it shows up in a giant black can. That
Wow.
Yeah, with like
Wow.
Gothic font.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's kind of
it is.
only in
Wow.
America. Only in America.
Yeah, it's just incredible. I mean, that whole premise is just built on the fragility of the human psyche, really, isn't it?
It is.
That's
And they've
ultimately
totally they've disrupted a
Oh,
a difficult to penetrate market. I mean, they've taken over water sales in the States
Yeah,
at every concert, every
yeah,
venue, event,
right.
you see the Liquid Death. And you see varieties of them. They have sparkling water now, flavored,
Yeah.
so it's
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean,
pretty
imagine
impressive.
essentially penetrating like every concert venue, every bar, like
Yeah.
just disrupting water and
hmm
taking that whole share and making people pay a premium for it. It's brilliant.
yeah,
So cool.
that's remarkable.
Yeah, Rob, it
I
might
love
be time to switch
that's the
from
time.
Yes.
cybersecurity marketing to water marketing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, now we're
right.
warmed up. Now we're warmed up.
Well, great. Guys, thank you very much for joining us. For those of you who've been here for the last 2 minutes, I hope you enjoyed that little segue. I'm joined by two Daves. Well, we're gonna go with Dave and David today. Two fantastic people to run with me through this discussion. Let me just quickly introduce myself, and then I'll hand over to our two fellas here to introduce themselves. We'll do some quick housekeeping, and then we'll get going. So, my name's Rob Edmondson. I'm the Senior Director of Product Marketing here at CoreView, very much involved in building the message and understanding what it is that our customers really want and need, so we can do the best to support you guys out there. And I'm going to be hosting today's session focused on differentiating your MSP business by governing and securing Microsoft 365. So a really hot topic, definitely an area that's very important right now for MSPs. And I've got two fantastic people here to help me talk through this. I'm going to hand over to Dave Sobel. I'm sure you've already been pretty familiar with him, but Dave, give us an introduction for those who don't know you.
Oh, sure. Thanks for having me. I'm Dave Sobel. I am the host of the Business of Tech podcast. It's the leading podcast covering the managed services space. It's a top 50 tech news podcast. Every day, I analyze the stories you need to know as a solution provider and ask the question, why do we care? To give you some kind of perspective on what it's done. I was a leader in software delivery for managed services for 10 years. And before that, I ran an MSP for another decade. So I've been kind of on all sides of this industry and really looking forward to the discussion and any questions anyone has.
And David, over to you.
Thanks, Rob. Thank you, Dave. My name is also David, and I am the original co-founder of Simian Cloud, which is now configuration manager under CoreView. And so developed Simian Cloud from the ground up. Prior to that, ran a very small MSP in New York with a few clients in the medical industry. Up until recently was managing that. And in large part, Simian was developed to manage those clients at scale and be able to scale the business without, actually growing in headcount. So we developed automation solutions internally. Really excited, Dave, to be speaking with you today. And we haven't done this before, but I think we've known each other for some time now. So
Yeah,
this is
it's our
good.
first webinar appearance together, but we bumped into one another a few times along the way.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Thanks, guys. If we just click through to the next slide, David, so we can do the housekeeping stuff very
You
quick.
got it.
So, if there are any technical issues, please let us know in the chat feature so we can have a quick look at that, and I'll try and get that sorted. This is going to be recorded, so it'll be available on demand. You'll get an email link so you can get access to that and share it with people. And in terms of questions, please ask in the chat or through the Q&A tab throughout the session, and we'll answer as we go. We want to keep this dynamic, so I'll be keeping my eyes on that as we go through. But guys, just as a start, I mean, Dave, you mentioned there that it's been a while since you've been in MSP, and now you're working in a different part of the industry. But I guess this is to both of you. What has the experience of MSP? How has it changed over the last period of time? Since you were in that world.
Well, I'll kick it off. I mean, it's the complexity and the level of risk is at a significantly more dramatic level. I was look, I've got enough gray hairs to talk that I've been doing this for a little while. I founded my MSP in 2002, and as you look at that sort of aughts time period, some of the biggest issues we were dealing with were downtime and user error. Were the biggest risks that you were dealing with. You dealt with patching and you dealt with backups and restoration from the perspective of keeping people running. The biggest thing that you might have happen is if somebody got something, they might be offline for a little while. Shift to now, we're dealing with cyber criminals who are active syndicates of active terrorists, essentially coming in to steal resources and extort businesses. They'll hold your data hostage and then threaten to give it out to the world, and they'll make you pay for it. On top of that, you got to layer in all the level of complexity of legal requirements and compliance and regulation that you've got to deal with. If we're thinking US, it's not just HIPAA, but we're moving into a world of CMMC 2.0. In Europe, it's NIS 2. Like there's all of these frameworks that are actually significantly complicated and hit the entire market. The complexity is just so much. Oh, and by the way, you have to still actually deliver some business value on top of all of this. Technology is supposed to enable stuff. So it's not, you have to do all of these things all at the same time without an infinite IT budget. I like hard problems, but this one's a good one.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, Rob, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna pass it over to you, David.
Yeah, Dave, so eloquent as always, explaining the risks here and how that's changed over time. I think there's also a big change from the business side as well, and actually running the MSP from the business side, which is people a big shift I've seen. A lot of MSPs were selling hardware, right? That was a huge source of income for many MSPs. I remember when I was in high school, actually, that was one of my first jobs, was working at a local MSP, and we pretty much just built and sold servers, computers, and other hardware. And this guy did very well, and I, would see him show up in his nice sports car to work, and he was doing very well. And I saw him struggle to shift to, being a service provider, having this subscription-based model. And there's also a lot more competition, right? Today, with the resources people have, you don't really need to be a traditional technologist to become an MSP. People are able to leverage these online resources, and so there's a lot of competition. And I think a trend we see in the IT and MSP industry, we also see in a lot of other industries as well, which is where these large firms, VCs and large MSPs, are absorbing the small MSPs, and not just the small MSPs, but even medium-sized and larger MSPs too. A lot of my clients, they're saying, hey, I sold my MSP. I won't be working, they'll be working with so and so. And so those are interesting shifts and difficult things to navigate over time. I think that you have to be a lot more business savvy today than possibly in the past. I mean, Dave, you obviously were working at an MSP before I had experience in that industry. Would you say there's been a big shift in the business side since you were working at your MSP?
What an eloquent way of saying I'm old. I love it. The answer
I saw the smirk there as I
I
said
love
that.
it. I love it.
Not old, just older than me.
It's all good. It is all good. Seasoned. We'll go with seasoned.
Yes. Yeah. There you go.
So the answer is like, if I think about the the way I would invest my dollars as an
Hmm.
owner of an MSP business today. It's very different than most might even go to. I think you hit it exactly right, that business analysis skills. You probably should hire more business analysts than ever before. And I think there's a dark horse in training too. I think it's all services revenue. You want to think about, where can I put the people to deploy against services? And customers want help with their technology. One of the things, we all talk about the disruption, but I want to hit on one thing that I think has been foundational the entire time. Customers need help with their technology investment. That has been the same throughout the entire time. What we're doing might be a little different. We might go back, we go back in time. What we meant by technology investment was, am I buying the right stuff? Am I the right technology, the right desktops, the laptops? Am I running them correctly? Now we talk about that. We say, are we getting the most value out of the SaaS that I'm subscribing to? Are we actually leveraging it correctly? We're talking about Microsoft 365. Most users actually deploy it and then don't use all the features. Like, just literally the basic. They'll get started with, maybe they use OneDrive. We know they're all using email. They're not actually investing in workflow and making sure that you can leverage the power of the tools working together, really lean into what you get for your subscription, because I don't expect solution providers and MSPs to make money off the license, but I sure
Yeah,
expect them to make money off of making it work and sing for those small business customers, and not enough for doing that.
I
That's
completely
actually
agree.
oh, sorry. I was gonna say that was gonna be my next question for you guys, was why are people turning to MSPs to help them with Microsoft 365? But David, it's kind of like you answered that question there. The extra value is getting this huge suite of capabilities actually delivering value for that client, rather than just stagnating and being another software expenditure. Because I guess the scale of what you're paying for Microsoft 365 justifies sitting back and saying, how best can we get this service delivered, right?
Well, and it's hard, right? Let's also call this out. Like, and particularly for those MSP solution providers that have been doing this for a little while, it's really easy to fall into the habit of, we're the help desk, right? And we make sure that things are running, and we're doing, like, we're doing the infrastructure management side of this. And I don't want to be dismissive of that, because I think that portion is important, but it's not as important as it used to be. And the differentiator is the other bit. I mean, and a lot of people are not spending the time of knowing, hey, I have to get my hands really dirty in their business. I've got to get involved in their business. I've got to be involved in training them to use the technology beyond just, can they use email? Can they be effective at it? Can they be really using those tools in a way that drives them? And I'm going to give a really simple example that I want everyone to latch onto. That's because we're kind of experienced with it. Like, when we all transformed to this, most people were working remotely during the pandemic timeframe. Everyone assumed it was just, jumping into into the virtual video world. Well, it's more than that. Let me smile and go, you have to be 20% more dynamic to make it convey through video. You guys have been laughing and chuckling to a couple of my jokes. I have to be bigger and sillier than I might be in person to be effective in this medium. That's not a technical skill. That's a business skill that I've learned over time with the craft. And teaching users how to be effective with the tools is exactly that. Is making sure that it's not just a matter of giving them teams or giving them, the ability to workflow. It's actually walking them through the process of how it can be effective and
Mhm.
driving to those end results.
It's interesting there, like the distinction you're making between, someone might go to market saying, oh, we're going to get this technology working, or there's this approach which is, hey, we're going to make sure you as an organization are getting, these incredible outcomes from this, because we're not just going to stop at the technology. We're going to help you as an organization, people, process, technology together, right? That seems to be the message.
Yeah. I mean, an example from, the MSP that I was running, where we just had, I said this in the introduction for people who joined late, we had a very small MSP. My brother and I ran just a few medical offices in New York, and, very complicated setups, because even if they're just 20, 30 employee firms, medical offices have all their devices, their printers, their receptionists. There's a lot going on there. So a complicated few clients. And I remember, they all had Microsoft 365, and one of the offices wanted to be able to chat instantly, between each other, and they didn't even know they had Teams. I mean, we never told them they had Teams, right? So they were emailing each other or walking across the office. This is 2016, I think, or 2015, and so they're still everyone's in the office walking around and talking to each other, and then I'm on the phone and I go, oh, you guys actually already pay for an instant messaging software that's totally set up. And then about a month, I was, pretty much managing it remotely. About a month later, I go into the office. They've set up their own channels, their own teams, and all I did was send them some basic training materials on actually how to get started in Teams, and it's a huge step. I think though that there is a fine line you have to um, walk though in introducing new features to your clients, because I'm, not to use like these buzzwords, but like feature fatigue. I was like spitballing with ChatGPT the other day, and it mentioned feature fatigue when I was talking about Microsoft 365 and the downfalls that some people experience. And unused software was another thing. And so, while you want to leverage all that Microsoft 365 and your other subscriptions have to offer, right? You don't want to pay for something you're not actually utilizing. It can be very overwhelming to your users, especially who are not technologists. If you come in and you start to train them on Teams and OneDrive and Outlook and MFA and tasks, there's just a lot to do there. So I think it's very important to train people in a reasonable way.
Well, let's make that actionable, right? Because David, you're so right? That's
Yeah,
exactly the problem. And so a lot of people, when I say
not
training,
all at once, right?
well, they oftentimes think that I mean like put everybody in a classroom and give them 3 days of training. And actually, that's not the most effective way. The most
Hmm.
effective way is alluded to in exactly what you just said, which is the idea of giving it in small consumable pieces over a period of time. You introduce, for example, you showed them chat, and then they set it up, and then the next opportunity is you can say, hey, are you guys aware of Huddle, and can you like pull people together in video? Did you know you could do that? Hey, I've identified that you've got this issue with communication on what you're doing. Let me show you how tasks works there. And it's a very, very progressive drip strategy of training people and engaging them over a long period of time. And by the way, solution for everybody listening, this is such a win for your stickiness and customer satisfaction to lean into doing it this way, because they want you to be engaged, because every time they learn a little bit more, they make a little bit more productive, they get better at what they do progressively, and they are excited to interact with you, versus the idea of like just waiting for something to break.
Absolutely. I want to emphasize one thing here, Rob. I think you're about to speak, but I want to emphasize one thing here, which is that this is where MSPs distinguish themselves. The good MSPs distinguish themselves as MSPs, as service providers, not break fix, not resellers. And this is how we were able to, make a living off of having 3 or 4 clients of 20-person businesses, because we were not just providing them, hey, here's your tech, we set up your computers, let me know when your printer breaks. We're actually providing them with services and making their business more efficient with these services that we're providing. So that, a lot of people, there's all these courses out there and discussion about, oh, how can I become a 6-figure MSP, or how can I charge more? And it's all about the reselling and upselling people on licenses, which I've always actually been a proponent of doing the exact opposite. You should get the minimum license SKU. You should get the cheapest license SKU for your client that satisfies your business needs. If you're a very complex organization and you need an E5, get the E5. I'm not discouraging that. You need that. But every business I've had only needs business premium, or every tenant I've worked with really is a business premium tenant. And it's great for them because they're like, okay, this is great. I spend $20 per user per month on a license. And then where your value comes in and your justification for charging more is in offering those services and doing exactly what Dave said, which is, enabling them to leverage these services and be more efficient as a business, not just the person they call when something breaks. Like
Preach
you're an
on, brother,
integral
preach
part of their
on,
business.
because that is so right.
Yeah.
Like it's you want to be the advocate for your customer about spending their money in the wisest and smartest way to maximize the return, and you want to
Yeah.
show them the value that you're delivering and the outcomes in the business. You don't want to sell them the most expensive shiny thing. You want to make sure that they go, wow, every dollar, every pound, every euro I spend, I get a $125 back, and they will just
Yeah, and
spend like crazy when you're showing that level. They'll spend as much as you ask if you can show I'm getting the return on that.
exactly. It's something I would see all the time where a lot of people, in the industry are like, oh, like I really want to buy Simian or I really want to buy Okta, but and my client needs it, but I have to sell them on it and I need to increase my prices and or increase the subscription fee. And in my experience, if you do what we're saying, where you are actually a service provider and you're integrated into the business, you just tell them, hey, I need to buy this software for you. This is required, right? And you're not reselling them on it. None of the profit that we had, I mean, a little bit is on the license reselling and some hardware, but most of it is a fee for the services you're providing. So you gain that, not only are you really providing more value, but you gain trust, able to make more and have a smoother business experience when you're growing your stack. Preach that,
So,
Dave, for sure.
so for you guys, talking about this helping clients really get the value out of their Microsoft 365 experience and ensuring that you're delivering that service on top of the technology. That's a really positive story that we can work with clients on. On the other side, there's this sort of darker, more negative story about security and risk. It doesn't have to be dark, but inevitably when you contrast the two, it's a different type of concern. Do you think that there's a real appetite from customers and clients out there as they work with MSPs to see them solve the security risks of Microsoft 365 alongside helping them get collaborative value? Like, are those two just completely married together, or are they kind of different sizes of markets?
All right, I'm gonna take the bold stance, and I know Dave knows how I feel on this. So I'm not a cybersecurity expert, and I don't position myself as one of that. And I'll smile and say I didn't get into technology to fight criminals. Like that's not why I do what I do. And you're exactly right, like because it's really dark, and we need to be realistic about what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a landscape of organized crime that is attacking in mass in an automated way to steal your money. And I think one of the things that we do too much when we talk security is we use fluffy or genericized threat actors or vectors of attack, and we use these words that are very technical that actually take away what I want customers to hear. Tony Soprano with a computer is coming for you, right? That's what's actually happening out there. Now, do I want to spend money on that? Not particularly, right? But at the same time, I know that for the same reason that I put locks and airbags are not optional on my car, that I'm going to make sure that we include cybersecurity, good hygiene as part of what we deliver, because it would be irresponsible of us to get in a car that doesn't have an airbag and doesn't have locks and the brakes aren't great, and like that would just be irresponsible. So we have to do the basics. But by the way, we have to do the basics really well, and we need to really lean into making sure that we're driving our customers to do the basics. That's patch management. That is multi-factor authentication. Like, and I'm going to say it twice because of how important it is. It's good backups. It is good security policies. And those things are simply not optional. And you don't, for the same reason as David said, that customers will do whatever you say when you're building trust. Those are not optional discussions.
Yeah, if I may, I want to emphasize one thing there, Rob. I agree, or sorry, Dave, I agree with most of what you're saying, but I want to emphasize the basics because not every organization needs to leverage every security setting in Microsoft 365. And I see people sometimes swing like a pendulum from, okay, I have nothing, I have no MFA enabled, or I need to utilize Cloud App Security, Sentinel, every
Right.
every setting. And it's like, no, you need to do the basics, right, as an MSP. And yeah, I think that's important to distinguish for people.
What are the basics?
I think we said one of the key basics, which is MFA for all users, right, Dave?
I,
Complex.
I lead I lead with this because I find it just obscene that there are solution providers that we would even consider not doing that. Because like, I really want to re-emphasize this because I think the communication is important. These are keys. They are keys. You need a key to your office, you need a key to your house, you need a key to your car. Why do you think you don't need a key to your computer? And the modern key is multi-factor authentication. I don't want people to go all the way to passkeys, like I want to get to there, but if we can just do multi-factor authentication, we've got a huge win, right? And
Yeah.
because we've got to move beyond passwords. I then also think the basics are like I'm going to stress patch management. That most vulnerabilities happen because people have not been on top of that. Again, allowing users to dismiss, oh, later. That's not an option, right? That's not the way this goes. And then, by the way, leaning really into disaster recovery. And I want to actually extend, like, first off, backups are fundamental, but I think you need to have built out your plan for when there will be a breach. And talk about just from the perspective of you're going to be breached, it's going to happen. We need to talk about what it's like. What's your plan for that? What's our how is our incident response plan look like? What are we going to do? Are we prepared to tell the criminals we're not paying the ransom? Are we prepared for that? And by the way, are we
Right.
prepared for the downtime? And you can be a conversation, whatever you could be cyber insurance. It could be a rainy day fund. Have enough money ready for a day of downtime.
Mm-hmm.
like you're ready. What if revenue dries up for a day? You've got a rainy day fund. You've self-insured. That's a strategy. I just want you to have one.
Yeah, I don't want to oversimplify the MFA piece though, because MFA doesn't mean just turning on, the legacy MFA setting where all your users are prompted to do MFA. You really do need to build out your conditional access policy practice. You can start with, just turning on MFA or one policy, but you really do need several strong policies to, cover your bases, right? Block risky sign-ins or certain locations. That is very important. It's not just MFA. Dave, I agree with what you're saying, but I just want for the audience that it's not
By the way,
that simple.
I'm
And
so with you. I'm so
yeah,
with
it's
you.
not that simple.
I'll smile and go, look, I listen to a lot of conversations. I still watch conversations with smart solution providers saying, well, my customer just doesn't want to turn it on. And I want to make sure that portion of the market needs to know that conversation should not be
Yeah. Yeah, definitely not. It's a requirement, right?
right.
It's a requirement, and communicating that clearly is very important, and being able to speak about it intelligently. And I think one thing, that I want to emphasize is previously Microsoft pretty much left people to, to their own to develop their conditional access policies. And you really need,
Mm-hmm.
I would say, five or, there's probably 4 or 5 critical conditional access policies that you need, maybe, give or take a few. And now Microsoft does provide their out-of-the-box conditional access policies. They have for a couple of years now, and Microsoft, to their credit, is getting better at that. But right now, when you spin up a new tenant, it's still pretty bare bones. You really don't get much out of the box, and it takes a few days for them to turn on the security defaults and prompt you to turn on MFA
Yeah.
when you have a
But
new tenant.
in answer to you, to circle us back around, Rob, and then want to hear more of what you want to know. Like, I don't necessarily believe in selling fear. Like, I don't think it can work. I get it. It's a strategy, but I want to, if you position yourself as the trusted advisor, or more in my mind, the person who's delivering guidance. I want to measure this based on outcomes, and I want to go to business outcomes, and I want you to think of me from the perspective of I am the helping you run your business, of which mitigating risk is one component, and thus I think about security. I don't want
Mhm.
to come in there and go like, I got to protect you against all the crisis. Like, I don't start there. I live in the real world, and thus we're going to have conversations about risk, but the goal is to get you to a good business outcome, and keep circling back to that, just making sure to integrate it into the story.
So how do you, this actually raises a really good point, which is, fear, uncertainty, doubt. Everyone resists that these days. There's so much of it on the internet coming at people. People can sort of smell it a mile away. And, we don't want to be those people. So in these conversations, when you're speaking with clients, how do you have that mature conversation where you say, look, we're going to take you on. Let's just be really clear. There are risks involved here. We want to make sure we help you with those. How do you move that conversation forward? How do you start to open that up without, spreading fear and uncertainty and doubt?
Well, I think it's a smart risk conversation. Is that we have to be careful about security conversations and make sure that we're not talking in absolutes, and we're talking in real world scenarios. I want to protect you, Mr. Customer, from these scenarios, which are the most common. And then let's talk about your level of risk tolerance and what we want to protect you against. And then we're going to layer in your industry, your compliance requirements, your geography. I'm going to have a very different conversation with a US defense related organization than I am going to with a small legal practice that handles regional traffic cases, right? Like it's just different risk profiles. And
Absolutely.
so what we're
Yeah.
saying is I want to guide you through this process of understanding what your risk is, and we're not going to talk in absolutes. And I even don't mind saying I like teasing the security guys by saying I can give them infinite money and they will still not promise to protect me from an attack. So perhaps we shouldn't give them infinite money. We should actually just find the right balance for you, Mr. Customer, so that we can also take your money and spend it on those business outcomes that we talked about earlier. David, I know
Yeah.
you've got some good real world stuff that you've done.
Yeah, I also think talking to the right person at the company is critical. I've pr previously been told, okay, you're going to work with the office manager, and the office manager is an excellent person to work with, but they don't have the respect in the workplace to say, okay, now everyone's going to have MFA turned on tomorrow. You really do want to be talking to the right person in the organization, and typically the scale we're talking about, where we're talking about smaller businesses, it's going to be the business owner. And they will typically, someone at a high level, the CEO or the lead doctor, lead lawyer, the partner at the firm, typically will understand what you're articulating of these cybersecurity risks. And when it's coming top down from the owner of the firm, it holds 100% weight, and you're able to have that influence. So even if the lawyer tells you, hey, work with my office manager, you could say, we have a really important kickoff discussion about our security risks and the posture. We need to have the business owners here as well. So I think getting buy-in from key players, I mean, this applies in all business cases, far beyond just the MSP world and technology. I mean, even in sales of all kinds of stuff, you need to talk to the key people. I think it's a huge thing. And I want to emphasize, Dave, what you said, kind of like there's no one size fits all. I think that can be a little bit of a downfall, where even within the small businesses, you need to discuss with them and understand what their risk tolerance is and develop a
Mm-hmm.
security posture for them, right? You can have your general baseline, but some organizations you might be stricter or less strict. And you can do that. Maybe one has more sensitive information than the other, and so you can have a more lenient experience.
And leverage, by the way, what you were already talking about earlier is you're matching people to the right solution. You'll be able to leverage your previous, as David talked about in his examples of matching to the right license, matching to the right product. You'll be able to leverage that trust to make sure that you're showing that you're not overselling, that you're actually matching, you're customizing to their needs. And I think that that's a critically important piece. And I'll warn a lot of MSPs and solution providers. You're correct to think about standardization and to think about making sure that your stack is consistent and you're leveraging that. But don't lose sight of the value of matching a customer to a solution and the right version of it, right? They may not all, and so you want to marry those two in a way that provides real value and trust to your customer.
Yeah, and not to get too far from your question, Rob, but this is really what governance is.
Mm-hmm.
You're establishing your framework or your policies as your approach to how the business practices technology, and your security posture and your security measures are going to be informed by that. So, that is what your governance framework is, and establishing this, even in writing, can be a good thing. I can't say I've necessarily done that before, where I've put our discussion and the policies we chose in writing, but I would encourage people to do it. You have your conversation with the business owner or the key stakeholders, and you say, okay, we've established this is our risk tolerance, and as such, these are the things we'll implement. This is our framework, our governance framework for approaching, security questions and, technical decisions we have to make moving forward, and that's how we will do that.
Mm-hmm.
I spoke recently, had the pleasure with speaking to a guy who just started up his own MSP in Switzerland. Young guy, and he just decided to go it and to start his journey. Fantastic speaking to him, just so much energy and passion. And as we were talking about his approach, he'd done this really I mean, I don't really know PowerShell, but it sounds complicated. And he basically taken most of the CIS guidance on how to keep Microsoft 365 secure and properly configured, and he'd written a PowerShell script that he could use with clients as a sort of a health check. So he could go and meet with them, run this, find a bunch of stuff, and then say, hey, rather than being like, whoa, all these scary things are going on, say, look, here's the specifics of what's going on for you right now. These are the sorts of things I'm concerned about. What do you guys think about that kind of approach? Is that a good approach to having this conversation, or is that
Oh, it's brilliant. And I'm going to tell you, call him back. Okay. When we get off this webinar, I want you to call him back, and I want you to tell him that what he actually wants to do is the next step is lean into automation of that, because he's totally on to something, right? So it's incredibly valuable to talk about customers at their moment of interaction and say, like, this is where you're at right now. But what's really key to what he's unlocked there is the idea of you want to maintain that over time. One of the things about, particularly cloud environments, is that you've got to continually watch to make sure that you remain set the way you intended, and that you don't fall out of compliance, or that things don't change. And what he's latched on to by using the technology to look for it, that's a moment in time. If you can then do that continuously for the customer and keep them in a state of compliance, that is incredibly valuable, like crazy valuable. Rob, call that guy back. Like,
Yeah.
tell him to automate that over time, because that's a service that you can deliver to keep clients done. And the more you can do it with automation, we talked earlier about the expensive labor and the people that you have to deploy on that. You can take that hard work off, and then your people can just deal with the exceptions. I think it's a brilliant approach. I would do it not just as a opening to the conversation, but as an ongoing service.
Yeah, and that is what desired state configuration is, right?
Yep.
We're all familiar with that DSC. That is how, how Simeon was conceived, was the idea of, we didn't want to just do set and forget. We don't have the resources to manually go into the tenants and make sure things are remaining in the state that we want them, how we want them to be. And so we, developed automation to have a continuous check to make sure that our tenants remain configured the way we want them to be. And I think the health check is a great thing, a great way to get your foot in the door too. If you're trying to get clients, it's a pretty good thing to come to the table with saying, hey, I'll run this free health check report on you, and then come up with suggestions based on that report and walk them through it. Huge emphasis though on what you said, Dave, just to second that, which is over time. Set and forget will absolutely not cut it anymore. You probably could get away with it a little, a little while ago, years ago, but now even with Microsoft making all their changes, right? So all the time there's new features and conditional access and new things that are important for you to utilize. So
Right,
totally
and by the way,
agree.
let's say this. I'm going to say with a bit of a smile. I love complex problems like that. Why? Because in the complexity is opportunity. Like,
Hmm.
in that issue of the fact that it is complicated, that it does change, and that you have to be engaged on a regular basis, that is opportunity to continue to have those conversations with customers, be there for them on an ongoing need. Now, by the way, it's hard. It is a tricky thing to continue to show that value over time. That kind of stuff often happens in the background. You're doing a really good job of quieting it, which is why, referring back to what we said earlier, you want to lean also into combining that with training and making sure that they're leveraging all of those new features over time as they roll out, so that they see the business side of that value while you're removing the technical complexity for them.
Yeah, it is. You want to communicate what you're doing, otherwise you will go unnoticed, and you want the business to be aware of the value you're providing. And so quarterly health checks, rather than just doing it the once, quarterly or twice a year, sharing that report, walking through it with the stakeholders. And one thing, just to talk about the ongoing piece, one last item there is, for changes that Microsoft makes, not new features, but Microsoft changes defaults, or I remember they made it so I think guests could join Teams meetings without asking. They didn't have to sit in the waiting room. People had to Microsoft turned it on so guests could join. and no one it was absolutely not released, but we had automation that was checking our tenant settings, and it reported, hey, this is now on. And so we went in, turned it off, let them know. We sent out a note and said, hey, Microsoft made this change. We picked it up and we turned it off. So that's another key example of just making sure you keep up with Microsoft.
Yeah, absolutely. Guys, just to say, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat as we go through the conversation. Very keen to hear what you guys want us to cover. And we'll have some time at the end as well if we need to do it then. Yeah, I think the thing that's popped into my head as we've been speaking is that sounds complicated just to do that for one client, right? So from my experience looking at Microsoft 365, it's a beast. It's not just one thing, it's so many things. So, how do you deliver that at scale? I'm assuming the only practical way to do this is automation, right?
Look, you can throw labor at anything. You can throw technology at anything. I want to be like let's have a very transparent conversation about this. You could choose to do this with labor. You can do
And people
anything with
do.
labor, and people do,
People spend
right?
hundreds of thousands of dollars on it and do it.
Right. You can do that. Totally viable. And by the way, as you're building out your service, you might decide when you're smaller and before you've scaled, you might do a lot of that by hand. That way, you have built out what is your best practices, your understanding. It gives you the technical insights into how you do. But know that that is costly. And as you scale and as you get to that level of complexity, and scale doesn't have to mean hundreds of thousands of customers, it can actually get complicated very fast. But that's when you want to think about automation. I would advise, like, one of the reasons, if you're a disciple of Michael Gerber and E-Myth and the E-Myth Master and stuff, which I very much am, one of the things that he leans into is the idea of developing your standard operating procedures and then deploying them. Think of yourself like a kind of the way a franchisor would build out a business. You do want to spend a lot of time crafting those particular pieces, and then you want to make sure they are systemized to get the value. So it's finding your balance on that. And so I find one of the things that I want to push providers to think about is I think they oftentimes immediately run to buying a tool when in fact spend a little bit of time understanding the problem so that you're doing a really good job of choosing the right tool that solves your set of needs, because then you'll be incredibly invested in it and be successful with it.
Yeah. I think, we're talking a lot about scale and, reducing man hours, but I think one of there's a little bit of a missing part there, which is not only is automation quick, but it's also correct, right? So when you're doing these things manually, it's very error prone. I've been in the portal. I've spent countless hours in the portals, and I still make mistakes. I forget to hit save sometimes. I've worked with clients before, MSPs, where they're saying, "Oh, this policy is not working." And I go, "Did you hit save?" Because Microsoft puts the save button all the way at the bottom for their policies. And so, with automation, you can actually, have confidence that things are configured correctly. Whenever I do something manually, I'm always afraid, did I forget to click this button or check that box? Especially in like Intune with the device configuration profiles, they're very long and complex, and you want to make sure that that's actually done correctly. And then, Rob, to very directly answer your question, I mean, we have the manual option, we have the in-house solution. So a lot of people are doing PowerShell, and then the step up from PowerShell would be leveraging DevOps, so doing Azure DevOps pipelines or GitHub Actions or GitLab, right? Using some kind of pipelines to do CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous development. That's the idea of what Dave said, where we have desired state configuration. So PowerShell would be, manual would be, you set it up one time and then you check it over time manually. PowerShell is using automation to do that, but you have to run the PowerShell. Moving to pipelines is a continuous way of doing that, setting it, but continuously running those pipelines on a schedule to make sure that your tenant remains in that state. And then we have third-party solutions that make that experience better. Those are namely, just to drop a couple names if that's helpful, namely Microsoft 365 DSC, which is Microsoft's open source project, which really kind of was a pioneer in the space for, you know, for that kind of CI/CD, things like Simian, and then there's a lot of other, players as well. But those are, and obviously we have for people that are familiar, like Ansible, and Terraform and Pulumi, which are infrastructure as code solutions. So I would say the spectrum goes all the way from manually configuring to solutions like uh, infrastructure as code and configuration as code solutions where you're continuously deploying to your tenant like Terraform, Pulumi, Simian, Microsoft 365 DSC.
So guys, would you recommend for people who are thinking about, maybe introducing an extra service on top of what they're doing in terms of security and governance for Microsoft 365, it seems like you would recommend them to have that conversation most instances when they speak with a prospective client. But do you keep it sort of separate so there are tiers available? Like, we'll just focus on collaboration. You're responsible for security. Here's a sort of a low level security for an organization that's somewhat concerned but doesn't have really intense standards they have to meet, and then you have a more intense sort of version that you're offering. Is that the kind of approach that makes sense?
So I take a bit of a hard line on one statement is I don't think you can ever have a conversation with a customer about technology and not know that you are at some level responsible for their security. Like I don't think you can have a conversation with a customer and then it go, well, we're not actually doing the security piece. Because they assume you're doing it right, and I'm putting that in quotes, right? Because they are hiring you because they are non-technical. They are hiring you because they want you to solve it, and they're not expecting you to dump a portion of the work back on them. Now,
Yeah.
there is joint risk models. There are ways of having conversation with, but I just want to make sure that people understand, in that I don't think you can sell a version where we don't do security. Now, we said earlier, there are tiers of that and there's customization of that. I think your job as a solution provider, particularly if you're a managed services provider trying to do it as services, is you probably have predefined things that are the way you do it, and that helps you operationally run the business very efficiently. I think you want to remove that complexity from your customer and make it easy to just say, like, this is what we are going to do together, Mr. Customer. We've talked through your needs. This is the solution, and you guide them to that thing. I don't think you put forth a menu and have them pick from the Chinese takeaway menu of things that they're ordering. I think you guide them to the solution that works for that. And if they say it isn't right, then you re-examine what's in the order to get it to what it's done, and you in the back end have those different standardized building blocks that you can assemble to put it together in a way that makes sense. That's the way that I think works the best through the entire value chain. David, you may have different thoughts on that.
Pretty much the same. I was actually going to say on this one, I don't really have anything different to say than what you said, Dave. I second that.
It makes sense that if you're responsible for the success of, let's just focus on like Microsoft Teams, right? And the rollout of that, that's going to involve configuring that service, which thereby introduces a security risk anyway, right? So before we even talk about, some other issues, the very process of being involved in rolling this out, configuring, building, they are going to see you as responsible, right? Because you've been in there playing around with the settings. So I can totally see that you can't separate those two things. That does make sense.
We'll do a little marketing too here. People think, particularly those that are trying to sell, think that choice is good for customers. It's actually not. Customers don't want tons of choices. They want confidence that they made the right choice. And so it's not a matter of putting forth as many choices as you can possibly get to, or giving them all of these plans and options so they feel comfortable. It's making sure that they're confident that they made the right choice. And that, so you can oftentimes, the more you can help guide them through the process to get them to the correct answer for them, the much more engaged they are going to be, the feel that they are invested in the process. They're going to be much more comfortable buying, and they're going to have long-term engagement with you because they'll feel comfortable that they made the right choice.
Yeah, I think I actually, when we were running the MSP, I actually took the approach of giving them minimal choice, pretty much none. They were all, we had the clients on prem, and once we were ready to move them to Azure AD and Microsoft 365, that's exactly what we did. And they were upset because it was we put everyone on Azure virtual desktops to also reduce costs, because we realized you could share a couple Azure virtual desktop instances. Save money and move things to the cloud for efficiency. And there was obviously growing pains, and we trained people, and things were a little bit slower to begin with, but ultimately that was the stance we were taking, and that's the direction the industry was going in. And so that is that was the decision we made, and there wasn't a big choice part on the client side. This is just what we were doing, and from everything that Dave and I have discussed before, once you have that trust from your client, you can do things like that, and they'll follow you, right? You are the technologist, not the firm that you're working for.
If I had to summarize, there's a couple of questions in here. They're basically both asking for just very straightforward guidance on how to get started. So here's a good question. This is a very good place to sort of start to wrap up. Guys, if someone's just saying, okay, I want to offer security and governance as part of my service, how do I get started today? Like, what's a short summary that can help them just practically get going? Oh,
I think, Dave, we may have lost your audio.
yeah, I think so. Yeah, I don't know why.
Looks like mine's coming through. Yeah, it's not, Dave. I see you and your mouth
That's so
moving,
strange.
but
Yeah,
I
you're
don't
not
see
muted
anything.
either. Maybe I'll pass it over to you, David, first, and David, if you can just check
Rob,
your mic.
there might be like a connectivity issue. It cut out for me while you were. I was gonna
Oh,
rely on Dave answering the question. Can you restate the question?
okay, cool.
Apologies.
No, that's fine. Yeah, there was a couple of questions in the chat. People basically just asking for guidance on how to get started. So I want to throw that back to you guys. Like very practically, how do we get started today if somebody wants to start offering security and governance as part of their service?
If I was getting started today and had limited knowledge, I would be leveraging Microsoft security baselines. So I would be leveraging the policies that Microsoft provides out of the box, such as those conditional access policies I was mentioning before, and other security baselines. And I would look to certain third-party tools, possibly Simian Cloud, CoreView, and other things that help you get those essentials. So um, looking to Microsoft's recommendations and the defaults that they provide and the baselines they provide, and then being informed by a compliance standard. So I would do some research, pick a compliance standard that is relevant to your industry. Maybe in the medical industry, it's HIPAA and CIS. I would probably point people the most to CIS. And if anyone watching does go to CIS and you look at their CIS benchmarks and CIS frameworks, you will see it is a very overwhelming amount of information. So, definitely look at the resources CIS provides, but go beyond that and see what people are talking about CIS and other breakdowns that summarize the essentials.
That's great.
Dave, do we have? No, still don't have you, Dave, unfortunately. Yeah.
That's tricky. I was going to say we could put it in the chat, but it's probably going to be a bit tricky to do it that way. I'm trying to work out how best we can resolve the audio. I mean, Dave, if you want to jump out and jump back in just for the final 5 minutes, maybe that's an option. Okay, see you in a
All
second.
right. You and me.
The two amigos. Yeah. Okay. So practically looking at standards, not just saying what shall I pick and choose in terms of the approach, like using an authoritative standard. That's great because then you can leverage that sense of authority as part of your offering.
Absolutely. And then you're not coming up with it yourself. I want to change my answer to your question. That's the first thing I would do is pick a standard, educate myself on it, and then learn how to implement it.
Yeah.
Because you should not even someone who's a cybersecurity expert, I would suggest that you are informed by standards, certainly. Do we have you, Dave?
Yes.
I think so. Let's try this.
Yes, we do.
All right,
There
cool.
we go.
So good deal. So I'm going to add to that because I was listening along. I'm also going to tell, particularly those based in the U.S., that I'm going to recommend to lean heavily into CMMC at this point.
Yes,
I'm
yes.
going to make a big prediction here for this group. I think we'll see over the next coming few years a bit of a standardization around CMMC, particularly in the U.S. It's going to hit a big swath of the U.S. market. The defense industry is a lot of people. And the reason I bring this up is I don't want you to think about jet fighters. I want you to think about the bolts that hold the jet together are made by a bolt manufacturer somewhere who has a defense contract. So CMMC is going to do a lot of that. And I think other industries are going to lean in and say, yeah, that makes sense for us because it's got an auditing component that isn't already there. The US government uses it pretty extensively, and I think they can lean into it. So I would say if I was picking a framework and I didn't have a previous industry guidance, I would lean heavily just into CMMC.
That's fair, Dave. And my understanding is that a lot of all government organizations, contractors and subcontractors are required to become CMMC compliant by a certain date. It
Yep.
could be even coming up soon, and it's a costly thing to do right now. But I mean, I agree with your take, Dave. If there's already certain people who are required, it's probably not long before CMMC will be looked at as the authoritative compliance
Yep.
standard and
There's my big
required.
prediction for everybody is I think it's moving that way.
I mean, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, to summarize the key points then, that's a really nice first one to put on the board. Look to an authoritative standard and sort of really drill into one of them. I guess that also helps you bring your expertise to clients, right? To help educate them. This is the sort of standard that we need to be standing up to. This is how we'll measure success. We've also talked about the role of trying to automate how you're doing things, whether it's a health check process or whether it's the ongoing management, to relieve the team so that we can focus on the positive stuff, right? Being able to work with clients to build out their vision, to help them realize benefits they didn't realize they were going to get. You're not going to be able to do that if you're way down in the weeds of doing everything manually. Anything else that we should sort of pin on the board as we wrap up?
We've covered a lot of ground here. I
Yeah,
think
we have covered a
the
lot.
I always like to sort of remind listeners, you don't have to do this all at once. No one necessarily thinks that you have to do every single bit of this, because we know you've got to run the existing operations. You need to make sure that you're continuing to grow the business. You've got HR, you've got all your day-to-day operational concerns. What I want most solution providers to think about is that you want to think about this in iterative development. Borrow from our friends over on the software development side that you want to make small changes over time that are directionally correct. And if you do that over time, you will get to your end destination. What's the easiest way to eat an elephant? One bite at a time. and so I really want you to take that and say, this is not a matter of doing it all at once. It's a matter of taking those small steps to get there.
Fantastic stuff. Thanks to you both. Just as we wrap up, I guess it's worth saying, as you signed up for this session, in the email, you'll have contacts for us here at CoreView if you want to speak to us about what we have available, and we're always just available to talk. We speak so often with people. We're constantly learning about what's going on. So please feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to share what we know, what could work, and to speak with you frankly. And Dave, if people want to reach out to you, what's the best way to do that?
I'm easy to find. You should be listening to the daily Business of Tech podcast. You can find that at businessof.tech. I'm on every social media platform. Find your favorite one and reach out. I do make myself available via email if you're interested too. It's just dave@mspradio.com. But you can catch all of my insights every single day on your favorite podcast platform or on YouTube.
Fantastic. Guys, thank you very much. This has been brilliant. I'll make sure to look up that brand of water. What was it? Liquid Death? That's going to be my first action after this MSP webinar.
Yeah, see if
That's
you
my
can
number
sort
one
the
action
case.
that I'm taking away. Yeah. Brilliant, gentlemen. Thank you very much. Have a great day,
Thank
and
you,
thanks
Rob.
for everyone who's listened.
Thanks, Rob.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.